Hey there, podcast listeners. This is Corbett Lunsford, your host. This special episode of the Building Performance Podcast is from last year's Fall Fast Track, which is my annual 6-week mastermind course with people all over the world, all about profiting from home performance. If you'd like to learn more and pre-register for free for the 2015 Fall Fast Track, you can do that at HomePerformance.training. Enjoy.
A rising tide lifts all boats. Fall Fast Track.
Today we're talking with Gavin Healy, who is the co-founder of Balance Point Home Performance and who is personally one of my favorite people in the entire world to talk about HVAC with. Gavin, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thanks for having us, Corbett.
Can you kind of briefly explain, just in case any of my listeners don't know who you are, what is the brunt of your work in California?
Well, we're a small building performance contractor, and I think that has a lot of varied meaning these days. What we do in our business, if it's retrofit construction going into existing homes, we'll test the home for all the energy features and performance features throughout the house. And then we'll make a game plan, basically a roadmap for the house, and that usually involves significant changes to the HVAC systems, the duct systems, plumbing systems, and the building enclosure. And it's not that every customer in an existing situation takes all of our recommendations, but we want to do it in a way such that we don't have to go back and repair something if they want to get their house better. And then we also work as a subcontractor in new construction, and we might be brought in on a design and consult basis, or we might be brought in as a subcontractor for mechanical systems, air barrier systems, or plumbing systems.
So when I heard you guys present at ACI West Coast, which was one of the best presentations I'd ever been to, was yours, you were talking about, well, your partner Dan Perunco was describing how when you guys get a new furnace into the shop, he would come in and find you an hour later with like the entire thing taken apart. Is that an accurate picture?
Yeah, but usually it's out in the field. I mean, it's one of the things that Dan and I both work in the field. So we're not only designing our systems and then waiting around for them to be installed and then testing them. We're the ones who are often out in the field putting them in. And so as we put them in, if there are tweaks that we can make to the system that we know will improve its performance or how it works for the customer, then we do those, and we're really clear on our end goals. When we go back and test a system, we're expecting to see a certain watt draw, a certain static pressure, a certain airflow, and if we don't get those things, we either start using different equipment or we modify the equipment we have till we get it.
And so even though you're in California, in most people's heads, that means, especially in Southern California, that's like one climate zone. You guys work in multiple climate zones, is that right?
Yeah, we do. We're located in the Sierra foothills, and because of the elevation gain, we work down in the Central Valley of California, where people use a lot of air conditioning during the summer and moderate amounts of heat. And then going up the foothills, it gets into a much greater amount of heat and less air conditioning, and finally we end up at 9,000 feet in the Sierras, where we have 30 or 40 feet of snow at some locations and lots of heating load.
So you're helping all types of different clients, and we'll get to your marketing plan in a minute. But as far as like the planning goes and rocking the plans, the reason that you would take apart these systems was kind of interesting. You're hot rodding normal conventional HVAC equipment. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are. I think that everything that we use is pretty much manufactured by somebody else, and so we know what we want to get out of the equipment. Airflow might be a big consideration, particularly out in our dry climate, and yet most of the the way the systems come from the manufacturers, they're not necessarily optimized for climates outside of, say, the southeast, where dehumidification is important.
And so you're running up the CFM in the machines and getting rid of some of the dehumidification that might be there. Is that essentially?
Yeah, right. Like an example is we just did a house down in Davis, California, and the size of the house is 4,200 square feet, and we're running a 2-ton heat pump to do the space conditioning, both in cooling and heating. So that's running about 700 cubic foot per minute of air per ton of capacity, and most people, engineers included, would think that's kind of crazy, but the system's working great.
Wow. So in order to get there, first we've got a plan. You just described a 4,200 square foot house that's running 2,100 square feet per ton of conditioning. How do you design the system? Obviously, you're not just designing the duct system and the HVAC. You also look at the enclosure. Is that right?
Yeah, we do to varying extents. Though on this particular project, we didn't have a very heavy hand in the enclosure, other than working with an architect who was familiar with air tightness goals, and then doing a little bit of coaching here and there. But it is one of those things that we need to be very aware of, understand what the likely outcome is with the enclosure, and if we want to push the limit, we have to be sure that we're gonna hit our enclosure goals as well. Getting a good read on all the players, particularly in new construction, which is much more difficult than existing construction, where we're the ones who are in charge of making sure all the decisions are right.
How do you get a good read on new construction contractors that you would be working on a team?
Asking probing questions. It might be if our concern is whether or not they're going to hit a particular air tightness goal, just asking them what ACH 50 they want to get to is one thing. Another thing would be saying, so at what point in the process do you plan to smoke the building to check for leakage? Getting deeper into the how are you going to make sure your building gets to where you want it to go.
Excellent. Yeah, that how exactly are you going to do this, I think, that's the niggling details that always come out. So as far as manual J goes, you guys do a manual J on all your systems?
We do.
Is it an actual manual J, or is it something equivalent, like an ASHRAE process?
Nope, it's an actual manual J. We use RightSoft and draw our buildings and ducts into the systems. And one of the big reasons we use that isn't necessarily for the specific load that it gives us, but more so for the proportional load that it gives us. So we know that when we do our best manual J, it typically comes out at a much lower BTU number than most of the other engineers or designers. And that's partially just because we're using more accurate inputs, like air infiltration rates that we measure and know or can reasonably predict, rather than just using defaults.
And how do you know what the air leakage rates are going to be?
It just comes with experience, I'd say. I mean, going out there and sealing down hundreds of existing homes and repeatedly getting 50 to 70% reductions in total air leakage just from addressing attics and crawl spaces and duct systems. And then knowing, based on new construction, it's mostly based on the complexity of the building design. And so if we've got a really simple shaped building with a slab on grade, we can project one thing. If we've got a vented attic versus an unvented attic, we can project another thing. So it's just working a lot in the different building stock.
So let me recap. You and Dan have an actual business that makes actual money. You work in 5 different microclimate zones, and you go out and you actually test a 50 to 70% air tightness increase when you have done a job, which means you're testing every single building. You're running manual J's and actually coming in, and it sounds like even tuning the manual J's in the future based on what you find with the performance of the units that you install. And so how much marketing do you actually have to do?
We don't do any marketing. I mean, not direct marketing. We've been a word of mouth business since we started. I guess that the marketing that we did do when we first started our business was just go out in the community and talk about what we were finding. So whether it was a church group or a Rotary Club or a builders association, doing like mini 1 to 2 hour presentations with slides of typical things that you might see in buildings, what we could do to fix them, and what sort of outcomes you could expect.
And so, I mean, I'm smiling hugely because this is exactly the kind of story that I love to hear. So essentially, you go out and explain to people what it is that you're doing. And by the way, how long do you spend explaining to them? Like, let's say you sit down with a church group and are giving a presentation.
Well, usually it's somebody in their group has approached us and asked us to do a presentation, and then they'll come back and say, well, there's no way our audience would sit down and listen to this type of stuff for much longer than an hour or two, so we'll give you that slot. And inevitably when we get there and we start showing pictures and people can relate to it, everyone in the audience can relate to something that's going on in their home, they don't let us get out of there in the allotted time. It's
And are people, so let's follow that. People hear you present, then they go home and they say, that's pretty interesting, and they start looking around the house. Do those people, I mean, do you have a pretty good conversion rate from people who just hear about what you're doing?
You know, I don't have a great way to track what the conversion rate is of people who just hear about what we're doing, but I would say that in general, we don't do a lot of home performance analysis on spec. I would say that more than 70% of the analysis, and it's probably even bigger than that now, that we do results in direct contracts for improvement.
And when you say on spec, you mean just people saying, hey, I just want to know more about my house?
Yeah, we want to suss out what the seriousness factor is in wanting to know more about their house, because we're really busy, and frankly, I want to spend as much time as I can improving people's houses, learning from the experience, having them have a great outcome. And the more time I spend just developing paperwork and reports for things that never occur or get done, that doesn't really serve anybody's goals, in my opinion.
Out of curiosity, do you charge for your analysis portion of the plan?
We do. Yeah, we do.
So if somebody doesn't end up signing on the dotted line for a contract, then at least you've gotten something for the analysis.
Yeah, it's not I mean, I wouldn't call it a highly profitable business just doing the analysis for us, but it does. It serves multiple purposes. It really it kind of pre-qualifies customers, and then it also starts the education process, because if we had to go in and just start talking about what we're going to do in a work scope sense, it can be overwhelming for customers who have never heard of air leakage or an air change per hour or high performance duct systems or any of the things that we're trying to accomplish in the home.
So would you say you spend a fair chunk of time with each client kind of educating them to appreciate what you do?
Absolutely.
And let's say that you've got a client who does most of the things on your list of recommended. Do they then end up using you as a contractor or as a subcontractor or even just as a referral source in the future?
Yeah, nine times out of 10, it's really difficult for somebody to find a contractor who can meet the recommendations or even understand the recommendations that we're talking about. So typically, whether it's HVAC work or air leakage reduction in an attic, those are all things that one way or the other, oftentimes people find that it's easiest for them to just go with a one-stop shop, and then they also get a spec for what we're going to accomplish at the end. And so if we're making the recommendation, we're doing the work, and then we're going back with them and handing them the infrared camera or the manometer and showing them, okay, this is what you found out in the beginning. This is what we did. You can see the proof, and then let's look at your utility bills on down the line.
Do you have anybody in your area who promises the same things as you do, but then kind of gets lazy at the end of their process and doesn't actually prove that they achieved performance?
I think that there's probably more and more of those people coming up, especially because of various incentive programs that are out there in the world. And I don't know other than incidental reports of people making claims and not achieving it, but I do know that it's going on, and I have seen examples of the work going out in the field just randomly coming across other people's work where it was clear that somebody was sold one thing and given another.
Mm-hmm. How would you, if you don't have a plan for this, then that's fine, but how do you combat that as a business person who's dealing with that as competition?
I don't really consider it competition.
Good.
I mean, realistically, a lot of the times I'm going to, if the customer was dissatisfied enough to spend money on accomplishing something and they didn't actually accomplish it, chances are good that eventually we're going to get the call to fix that.
And they'll remember how honest and nice you were and how much you educated them and, harped on the results. That's awesome. So 5 climate zones, no marketing, busy as heck. Gavin Healy, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thank you, Corbett.
Gavin Healy is the co-founder of Balance Point Home Performance in California.
A rising tide lifts all boats. Fall Fast Track.